And now on to our program. We are fortunate to have as our guest for the 2012 Texas Tribune Festival's opening session the Honorable Rick Perry, the 47th Governor of Texas and the longest-serving Chief Executive in the state's history. All right. Right. Good to see you. That's right.
Where do you want me?
Can I put you right there, Governor?
I'd rather sit to your right.
You sit wherever you like, Governor.
I am generally always to your right.
Okay. You are? I would observe, Governor, that you're genuinely to a lot of people's right. That's actually fine.
It's very good.
Well, good to see you.
Senator.
Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Again, Senator Zaffirini and I were together yesterday, and I made an apology to her because of my voice. The ragweed in Austin is doing well, so I haven't changed my cutting attitude. It's just a softer voice.
Okay, well, Governor, I promise we'll listen carefully to everything
Yes,
you have
sir.
to say. Governor, I was hoping today to begin to talk about the budget, but then you had to bring up Satan this week. I wanted to ask you about your comments earlier this week about separation of church and state. You indicated that you believed, if I understand this right, that separation of church and state is the devil's work. Would you please explain what you meant by that, sir?
Well, let me just go on the record and saying I believe in Satan. And I certainly hope most of the people in here do. I think it was in one of those great movies, The Usual Suspects, where the fellow said that one of the great tricks that Satan pulled was making people believe that he didn't exist. So my point is that it's a very interesting discussion I think we need to have as a country. That in the late 1940s there was a court case of which created modern day separation of church and state. And my point has always been that the secularists and the left would try to keep people of faith from being engaged in the public arena, and that's what that discussion was all about. And I think, I think it's a good discussion to have in the country today. I happen to believe that people of faith should be very much involved, and their values should be very much involved in the public arena, and that's what that statement was about. That the idea that if you don't want to think that there's forces of darkness and spirits and spiritual warfare, that's your call. I'm Christian. I believe that's what my faith teaches me. So the idea that somehow or another that you could say that Satan would be involved in every act and decision that goes on in the world is not out of the ordinary for those of us of the Christian faith, and that if he's trying to keep people out of the public arena through any way that he can, through hook or crook or lying or whatever you'd want to put out there, I believe he's certainly capable of. So, that's my belief, and don't apologize for it.
Governor, do you really believe today that there are people who are kept from public life because of their faith? It actually feels like, Governor, the opposite may be true, that there's more people of good faith, strong faith, in public life today than at any time I can remember.
I don't know whether that's true or not, but I know that when there is a directive that comes down from a federal court that you can't pray at a public event, that's basically saying that people of faith shouldn't be involved in the public arena. I mean, there's case after case of where folks have been, have been pushed back on from the standpoint of being engaged in things in prayer. I mean, it's just right here in the state of Texas we've had those events. So, I don't know whether there's more people involved in public life now that are people of faith or not. I know that our founding fathers were not afraid to talk about and rather expansively about this country and how it was created. The Declaration of Independence clearly said that we, have these rights and they were given to us from God. And so, I mean, I think it's a good discussion to have. I think it's a healthy discussion to have. Are we afraid to allow people of faith to come and be very engaged in the public arena and their values? I mean, the bottom line is going to be somebody's values are going to be legislated. And the question is going to be, is whose values are it?
Well, let's talk about your values from a budget standpoint, Governor. That's where I'd hope to begin. Let's go there right now.
Now we can really talk about Satan.
Oh, is that it? Okay, well, let's see how that ends up manifesting itself here. Governor, when you came back from the presidential campaign trail, one of the earliest and most notable things you did was put your marker down on something you called the Texas Budget Compact.
Yeah.
And you asked people to join you in advocating for a plan that had several features, among them no new taxes, no increases in existing taxes, and no touching the rainy day fund. We are a fast-growing state, Governor, as you know, as you like to talk about out in the world. Do you really believe we have a spending as opposed to a revenue problem, that we have enough money to meet our basic obligations as a state without finding new sources of revenue?
Well, I think the discussion is about what are new sources of revenue, and I happen to think that new sources of revenue come by creating an environment in the state where people move here and they create new jobs and they create new wealth, and that creates new resources. So the idea that you can't grow and create enough revenue flow and have a velocity of that monetary system into the state of Texas is a bit foreign to me. I think you can. And the idea that we need to be using the rainy day fund for everyday expenses or recurring expenses. I've said that we could use the rainy day fund, and the legislature has agreed for one-time expenses. And you know, in that budget compact, I also talked about some other very, I think, thoughtful ideas of putting a constitutional amendment into place where that we limit the growth. I mean, all of those, none of that's new.
Yeah.
Every one of those ideas we've laid out and we've talked about before. And there is a reason that Texas is the #1 state in the nation to do business. I was with Scott Walker and Rick Scott from Florida today with a Chinese delegation, and the overwhelming knowledge in that group is that this is the best state in the nation to do business. And it's because we've kept our tax structure relatively low and a low impact on the job creators. We've had a regulatory climate that is fair and predictable. We passed the most sweeping tort reform in the nation back in '03, and then we passed an additional part of legal reform called loser pay this last session of the legislature, continuing to send the message that Texas is a place that's going to be fair from a legal standpoint. And then governments, by and large, get out of the way and let the private sector do what the private sector does best. And that has been it's been a model that's worked. And we're for the 10th year in a row, we're the #1 state in the nation for export. CEO Magazine for the 8th year in a row, Texas is the best state in the nation to do business. 220,000 plus jobs, July to July, 2011 to 2012, were created in this state. As a matter of fact, the numbers were just out for this last month. Texas created more jobs than any other state in the nation. So if we're not doing a pretty good job of creating an environment for businesses to move here, my instinct is eBay and Facebook are not moving to Texas and expanding in Texas because they're concerned about our skilled workforce, or they're concerned about being able to keep more of what they work for. I happen to think we have found a fairly good balance of being able to give people freedom, and I think that's what this is really about, freedom from over-taxation, over-litigation, over-regulation. And we found a good balance of funding government at a level. And Richard Fisher, who I would highly recommend everyone just, with your spare time. Federal Reserve Chairman. Yeah. If you want to see someone who I think is very, very bright, very capable, on a different political team than I've historically, well, not historically, but currently playing for, let me put it that way. And but
you do have a history, Governor.
I do have a history. So my point is, Richard Fisher talks about the Texas economy, and I think he does a really good job of it. And he's got an interesting perspective. One of these days, you ought to have him in to talk on one of your panels. But just go to Richard Fisher and the Texas economy, and he's got a CNBC interview that is fabulous that I think does a good job. But my point is this: we have, I think, found a good balance. The senator will tell you quickly, we come to Austin, Texas every other year for 140 days, and we debate vigorously and passionately. But we find middle ground. We find solutions to our problems. We have a constitutional amendment that requires us to balance our budget. I happen to think that not creating new burdens on those generators of those jobs is a good way to continue sending the message that this is the state that you want to live in, that this is the place where freedom still reigns.
Governor, let me be sure that I understand exactly. When you say no new taxes and no new increases on, or no new increases on existing taxes, do you also rule out new fees, price increases? Are we just not going to bring any additional money in the door through those traditional sources? Is that also off the table? Fees?
Oh, when you talk about fees, I think it's important to have an understanding. If you're just talking about giving a particular agency or one of the things I'm going to call for is a 4-year tuition freeze on our universities. I think it makes sense for us in this state to tell an incoming freshman that here is what your tuition is going to be for a 4-year period of time. This is what it's going to be. It's not going to change. It's going to be there for 4 years. Now, if you enjoy a little bit too much of college life and you go for your 5th year, there are no guarantees after that. But to send the message that this is what that university is going to charge you for 4 years, have that fee set. Now, to go back to your original question, are fees not ever going to change? Are there, the legislature may come in and say, you know what, we think there's a better way to fund water infrastructure. I know we're going to probably talk about water here sometime or another, but the fact is, over the last decade, we have substantively changed the way that we build transportation infrastructure in the state. And we got very, very far behind, and we've changed the way. We had very innovative financing tools that we changed the Constitution and we changed statute to allow it to happen. I don't think that those ought to be off the table to talk about.
You're willing to entertain that. You're willing to entertain some kind of change.
Well, of course. I think the idea that you're going to sit here and say absolutely no way are you going to have any changes in the way that you fund approaches to government is not very flexible. So there may be a better way than raising the gasoline tax or to raise a fee over here by using innovative financing and some type of bonding. So the idea that you just categorically say there's not going to be any change in the state of Texas is
What about the franchise tax, Governor? Last session, Senator Ogden, the chair of the Finance Committee, no one's idea of a Democrat, floated the possibility of tweaking the franchise tax, which he and some others perceive has not worked, has not done a sufficient job of bringing in the revenue that it was expected to, and has created what a lot of people believe is a structural deficit in the budget. Going into a session like the one coming up in January, we may be in the hole to the tune of, say, $10 billion for the biennium, strictly based on the underperformance of the franchise tax. You were unwilling last session, at the beginning of the session, when Senator Ogden said what he did, to entertain the possibility of tweaking it. Will you go back and look at that again this session?
Well, I don't think we ever said that we wouldn't entertain the idea of tweaking something. I think, if you want to take a look at it, have the debate, have the discussion, that's quite all right. The legislature's got to approve any of those changes, whether they be small or large, in any of our tax structure. I'm not going to tell anybody we can't do that. I think there's a pretty good still conservative, even with Senator Ogden gone, I still think there's a pretty conservative vein that runs through the core of the House and the Senate that reflects the people of the state of Texas. It may not reflect the blueberry and the tomato soup that we call Austin, but it is reflective of this state in the conservative philosophy towards taxes and regulation and litigation. So, that's why we meet every 140 days, to have vigorous debate.
But the question is whether, Governor, you would throw your body in front of any attempt to tweak it, and I hear you say that you would not. So,
well, I think that's always in the eye of the beholder, about whether I'm going to throw my body in front of something or not. So,
yes, Governor, I think we could agree that that's true. Let me ask you about public education. Let me toggle over to public ed. This was the most contentious issue perhaps during the last legislative session, which was full of contentious issues. As you know, there was a fairly large cut, a historic cut to public education. A lot of debate about what the impact of that cut has been. In some places, people think the gloom and doom predictions have come true. In other places, not so much. Where is your head at on public education with regard to the funding piece now almost 18 months out from that cut?
Well, I think you have to take into account what that funding position was. And the session before, in the 09 session, we had a huge amount of money that flowed in from stimulus from Washington, D.C. And we knew that was going to be one-time money. We tried to give clear cautionary instructions to the legislature that these were dollars that were going to be one time, and to use them for recurring expenses was not wise. And the legislature did what you would expect the legislature to do when we were faced not only with a turn down in the economy, but also Washington didn't come with more stimulus money. They didn't print more money to send out to the states. And they made the reductions. Now, we're going to come back in, and as you well know, there has been substantial projections of resources well above what were projected coming in. Oil and gas receipts are up, more jobs have been created, sales tax receipts are up. I mean, our state, particularly relative to other states, are doing quite better than most of the other 49 states. But the fact is, we're going to come in here as we always do, and we're going to have an appropriate debate over wants and needs, and we're going to have a balanced budget at the end of the day.
So you all open the possibility, Governor, of putting some of the money back into public education that came out last time?
Well, I hold up that we will have an open and a thoughtful debate about what the wants and the needs are. And fun. Look, higher ed and public ed, education in the state of Texas has always been a priority over there, always. I mean, I can't think of since 1985 that we weren't having a major discussion about something dealing with either public or higher education. And in the last decade, I will suggest to you, we have made some extraordinarily good advances in both of those. When you look at our 8th and 4th grade African American and Hispanic students' test scores, when you see the progress that we're making on graduation rates, I mean, this state has made some very good progress. And you take into account the very diverse population that we have. I mean, you know, I got to think it's a little bit easier to educate children in Connecticut than it is this very diverse population of students, both in economic strata and cultural strata and ethnicity in the state of Texas. So, and you know, with the progress and I think the very good things that we've done in public ed, you look at higher education in this state and what has happened over the last decade and some of the benchmarks that have been made, the people that have been recruited to this state, the CPRIT, the cancer fund that's been put into place, you know, just as late as this last week, a major announcement at the University of Texas of some, I think, $15 million coming into this university for a major project, basically a biodefense lab that is going to be brought into Texas A&M University, of which we're going to be able to impact vaccine manufacturing. You think, we exported vaccine manufacturing, Evan, from this country over the course of the years, and now we're seeing it come back in and come back into the state of Texas. I mean, that is a fascinating concept, and it's happening because there have been some very thoughtful people put some very quality programs into place that is sending a message all around the world that if you are a cutting-edge leading researcher, technician, et cetera, this is the state you want to be in. You want to be in Texas, whether y'all are doing a program on adult stem cell, Texas Medical Center, more doctors, nurses, researchers go to work there every day than any other place in the world.
Governor, excuse me, let me come back to higher ed in a second. I want to ask you just to stay on public ed for a second. You know that Dan Patrick, the senator from Houston, who may very well want to be the chair of the Public Education Committee, has come out in favor of vouchers. Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst has come out in favor of vouchers. I'm wondering if, as part of the policy pronouncement that you're considering during the next legislative session, are you considering coming out in favor of vouchers? Would you consider possibly making vouchers, as has been rumored, an emergency item in the next legislative session?
Well, I've never changed my position on school choice, vouchers, competition. I've always been for it. That's not breaking any news tonight.
Right. But are you going to get behind a big effort to get vouchers put through
let
the
me
session?
address what you said.
Yeah.
You said there's a strong rumor out there that we're going to put it on the emergency call.
As an emergency item during the next session.
It reminds me of a saying that that a rumor can be halfway around the world before truth gets up and puts its boots on in the morning.
Well, put your boots on. Tell us that it's not true if it's not true.
Well, look, I mean, I'm not sure in September of any year prior to a legislative session we had an emergency.
Well, Governor, I know you like to think
list.
ahead. We're just wondering if you're thinking
Yeah, well, I don't
ahead
think
that
you
far.
have to think that far ahead. So,
Okay.
I mean, the idea is, look, I'm for competition in our public schools. I don't know why anybody shouldn't be for competition in our public schools and the way it exhibits itself in a lot of different ways. So the idea that we shouldn't have that conversation is a bit foreign to me.
Right.
If the senator is supportive of it, the lieutenant governor is supportive of it, I'm thinking it's probably going to be debated in the Senate.
You give it a pretty good chance. Okay. Senator, you mentioned higher ed. Let me ask you about your work on higher ed reform during the last legislative session. Much of the session last time was taken up with a discussion of what you intended to do for higher ed. That went on pause during the presidential campaign. But now that you're back and we're looking ahead to a new session, I wonder if you would tell us where your head is at on the question of higher ed reform. Where are we going with this issue from here?
Evan, it didn't go on pause. The men and women who truly believe that, and rightfully so, that the University of Texas, and Texas A&M, University of Houston, and a host of institutions across this state are making great progress. That didn't change. None of those leaders moved away from reforms we talked about. I laid out the idea of a $10,000 degree, and on first blush there was a lot of pushback, and there were people that said you can't do that, it's impossible. And today I think we've got 9, maybe working on 10 different institutions that have a $10,000 degree. When we were talking with Ray Keck down at Texas A&M International, they have a program that they're going to be able to put forward that's less than $10,000. I mean, we can transform higher education and make it more accessible, make it more affordable. And it gets right back to that issue of putting a 4-year freeze on tuition. I think it makes sense. And the reason we're doing that is that when we deregulated the tuition issue, we expected universities to respond with improving graduation rates, with putting a host of accountability in place. And the fact is they didn't do that well enough to certainly suit myself and most members of the legislature. So I think there's going to be a very positive response to the idea of freezing tuition for 4 years, partly so that the middle class knows this is what it's going to cost. And think about what we've done. Judith, again, you were one of the leaders of creating the Texas grant program. And I want to say our grant programs in the state of Texas are up by 900% since I've been the governor. I mean, we have made a real commitment to accessibility and affordability in this state. And that all goes hand in hand with making our schools be more transparent, making them be more, listen, why shouldn't our students be able to, the utilization of our university campuses should be up, our graduation rate should be up, and that's what we're gonna challenge these administrators and boards of regents and supporters of higher ed across the board, is that we're going to expect them to perform at a higher level. Is it uncomfortable? Yeah, it probably is. But if you're going to be a champion, if you're going to be the best in the world, whether you're an athlete or whether you're a university, it's going to be a little discomfort that goes along with that. And that's just what we're asking our people to do.
With regard to the campus we are on right now, there are many people who believe that your effort to launch a work toward higher ed reform was specifically directed at the University of Texas. I know you heard
I'm
this.
an
People
Aggie.
thought that this was a get UT move, and that specifically, Governor, it was a get Bill Powers move. I think when you came back from the presidential campaign trail and the plane landed at Bergstrom, the only question in the minds of some people were you going to orchestrate the firing of Bill Powers while you were still on the plane or when you got off the plane?
Yeah.
A lot of people expect that you will still figure out a way to remove President Powers through the Board of Regents from this university. Would you speak specifically to the people from UT who are concerned that you've got a thing about UT and a thing about Bill Powers so we can all stop talking about it?
I do have a thing about UT. And I love this university. And Senator Zaffarini will be one of the first to tell you that on any day except Thanksgiving. On Thanksgiving, I'm going to be in the stands. Well, no more.
No more. I mean, that's.
So
you can go back and enjoy
I can go back
right.
on a 365 day. Listen, again, this goes back to the rumor factory as well as, you know, there are rumors that get started every day. The University of Texas and their Board of Regents make decisions about administrators, and so the idea that I sit over in the Capitol and move the chess pieces and decide who's going to be at what university and when is just, you know, no governor's ever done that, and no governor's going to do that. So
you have no interest in seeing President Powers move on to the
Bill
next
Powers is going to be the master of his ship, as it should be. The University of Texas Board of Regents will make those decisions, and as they should.
Yeah.
So, you know, if he performs to a level that makes them happy, he'll keep his job. If he doesn't, he won't.
And these are your appointees, Governor. Let's remember that. And the question is whether you're attempting in any way to act through the appointments that you made. You have 3 regental appointments coming up in February.
And I suspect they will be very, very capable, independent
Similar
individuals.
to the ones that you appointed the last time.
You know what? You're probing in a place that's way too early to be probing.
So you don't have a list of names you want to share with us, actually?
No,
just among
I
the group
actually
here?
don't.
Can we do it by process of elimination?
How many of you would like to be on the University of Texas Board of Regents? Okay, I got a good group
Looks
to
like
work from.
your appointment secretary is going to be busy, Governor,
Yeah.
vetting all these applications for the reasons. Governor, let me ask you about health care. A lot has been made about the fact that you have so far said you do not want to expand Medicaid, an opportunity made available through federal health care reform. This week we found out from the Census Bureau that while the percentage of uninsured Texans is down to 23%, it is still 5.8 million Texans, more than any other state. As well, Steve Murdoch, the former state demographer, put out a report saying that if only Texas would embrace federal health reform, we could insure 3 million of those Texans by 2014, cut the uninsured problem in half. Governor, why are we not looking at the possibility of federal health care reform helping so many millions of Texans who are not insured?
Well, there are 2 issues here. One is Medicaid work. And my response, and most people that I deal with, is that Medicaid is broken. And Medicaid is burning up 25+% of our total budget in the state of Texas now. So, you know, I made the analogy of why would you want to put 1,000 more people on the Titanic when you know how it's going to turn out? Medicaid is not working because it is too inflexible. It's too run from Washington, D.C. If they're truly interested in getting more people with the appropriate health care, then I would suggest to you one of the quickest and wisest and most economical ways to do that would be to block grant back to the states and let the legislature and Kyle Janik and the leaders in the state come up with the plans and put a host of menu items out there for people to choose from. Listen, as we talked about in public education, this is a very, very diverse state. We have a huge immigrant population in this state. We have an extraordinarily young population in this state. So we have unique challenges when it comes to delivering health care, or for that matter, public education. So the idea that one size fits all that comes out of Washington, D.C., and here's how you're going to do it, and is not workable. So why would we want to join in and say, oh yeah, send us this money down here, and then it's not going to be there in the future, and you're going to have all of these people that are expecting all of these different programs. Here's the issue for me. If I'm a 25-year-old, healthy as a horse, young Texan, why should I be forced to buy health insurance? We just found out yesterday on the front page of the Austin American-Statesman that I don't know whether y'all covered this or not, but the AP had a story of not 4 million, but 6 million are going to be forced into either this health care coverage or to pay the penalty. We've been told it was $4 million. So the cost of this is just tremendous, and I will suggest that the idea that somehow or another that someone stands up and says, listen, if you all would just embrace the federal health care program, that all of your problems or even the bulk of your problems would go away. No, it wouldn't. And here's the bigger issue for me. If we were to do that, what it does is it puts education, it puts transportation infrastructure, it puts water infrastructure, more pressure on those programs, because when you embrace the program of which is coming out of Washington, D.C., it is going to suck a substantial more amount of money out of the state. And at that particular point in time, you have two choices. You either cut back on education, you cut back on transportation infrastructure, you cut back on these other things that state government pays, or you have a massive tax increase. And I will suggest to you, neither of those are options that people in the state of Texas think are the best options. We think being able to block grant those dollars back to the state and having options for people, giving people incentives to go into different types of programs and what have you. Maybe that 25-year-old, all he or she wants is a catastrophic plan. I want to spend my money on something else. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to live a responsible life. If I have a catastrophic event, then I want to have that up there. But the idea that we sit here and say we're going to cover everyone and we're going to force everyone into that at the expense of other government functions, I don't think it's good public policy.
You think it's a choice?
I do think it's a choice.
Financially. Governor, let me ask you about family planning funding. One aspect of the health care debate over the last year was women's health, and one aspect of that was family planning. You are a proud fiscal conservative. The Legislative Budget Board is among the entities that said during the last legislative session that if you cut family planning funding, the state will actually end up spending more money. Right now, more than 50% of births are already Medicaid births. The idea is that if you cut family planning funding, there would be more unwanted pregnancies, there'd be more Medicaid births. Ultimately, it would cost the state more. Is that fiscally conservative to cut family planning funding if you buy the premise that it would cost the state more money in the end?
Well, that's not the first time the Legislative Budget Board may have gotten something wrong.
So your view is that they're wrong. You challenge the premise.
I challenge the premise that we need to be using taxpayer, well, as a matter of fact, and most of the members of the legislature do too. Because if what you're saying, and I'd be real honest with you, I didn't see that report while we were having this discussion back during the legislative session, but it was a very powerful message that came out of the Texas legislature. We're not going to spend taxpayer money for abortion, nor abortion providers.
Is there evidence, Governor, that any taxpayer dollars have gone to pay for abortions? I understood that there was a rule in place expressly precluding taxpayer dollars from going to abortions.
There is clearly providers that are associated with Planned Parenthood, for instance, that are there to provide. You're either wanting to read a very narrow report or wherever you're getting your information, but I disagree with you.
So, Governor, if the money is going to Planned Parenthood clinics that do not provide abortion services, because that is by law the case, you still believe that because it goes to anybody associated with an abortion provider, even if they're not providing
Yes, and
abortion.
I believe that the Texas legislature that are elected by the people of the state of Texas have the right to make those kind of decisions, and not Washington, D.C.
Well, Governor, they're not up here, you're up here. I'm asking what
I
you
understand
think.
that,
Yeah.
but I work with them, and I know what their intent was. I know what the spirit of the law was, Evan, and that's what they wanted to do, and I was more than happy to sign that legislation because I agree with it.
And even if reducing some of the family planning funding,
But we
women's
don't
health
know
program
that,
funding,
so, you know,
had nothing to do with it was related to non-abortion services. So if women's health services that were not abortion related were ultimately a casualty of this, that's okay. Cutting family planning funding for the right reason allows us.
No, because you have other options out there. I mean, I was at a facility the night before last that are giving family planning services that don't do abortion. They focus on adoption. So the idea somehow or another that these services aren't going to be available is just a fallacy. That is wrong. There are a substantial number of those outlets out there. Listen, this is a debate that rages across this country. I understand it. But the fact is this: the Texas legislature, with vigorous and open debate, said we are not going to spend Texas taxpayer money on abortion. And that's the law of the state now. And the idea that those who want that money to be spent, and our friends in Washington, D.C. obviously want Planned Parenthood to get a substantial amount of money for their services. But the fact is, Texas has made this decision. This goes back to a debate that's probably going to go on for a long time about, are states going to have the sovereign right to decide what's in the best interest of their people through their legislature? And I happen to agree that Washington tries to force its ideas and its policies onto states, notwithstanding the sovereign right of our states to make those decisions.
Of course,
so
this wasn't about Washington, but I hear you, Governor. It
is about Washington, because Washington engaged in this in a very strict way, because they said they were going to cut our money off and tried to leverage us to send this state money. If you don't believe this was about Washington, then you weren't paying attention.
No, Governor, I believe it's about whether the cost that the state is going to have to incur if family planning funding is cut goes up. That's all I'm asking. And you say,
I don't think it is. So we could have had a very short conversation.
Well,
there,
we did.
Guess.
Let's have a longer conversation about immigration, and specifically in-state tuition. Let me take you back to those pleasant days of the presidential campaign.
They were pleasant days. I don't let anybody tell you they weren't pleasant
When you
days.
were out at a debate in Florida, and you made a statement that you believed that in-state tuition was the right thing to do, you were booed. I realize that some of the audiences at those debates were in a booing mood across the whole primary. Do you believe you were right then, Governor, that in-state tuition was the right thing, and would you continue to support the idea of in-state tuition going forward?
I would have a open and vigorous debate with anyone over the issue of how is the best way to deal with young people who find themselves in our state by no fault of their own. And the issue for us is that we have to deal with this. Governors and states have to deal with this. We don't have the pleasure of sitting on the sideline and saying, kick everybody out or do it this way or do it that way. We have to deal with reality, and reality is that we have a substantial population of young people in this state who are here by no fault of their own, have been here for the vast majority of their lives. And they have finished high school. And at that particular point in time, in the early 2000s, the Texas legislature made an economic decision. Are we going to send these young people on a path to be successful and be part of the Texas success story, or are we going to prohibit them because we're not going to allow them to be able to afford to go to a university and basically put them over onto government subsistence in some form or fashion? They're either going to end up in our justice system, or they're going to be on welfare of some form or fashion. In the Texas legislature, overwhelmingly, what was there, Judith? 4 dissenting votes in the entire Texas House and Senate.
But Governor, going into the next session, I can tell you I've interviewed 4 incoming members of the Texas Senate, 1 current and 3 incoming, who've all said they would like to see in-state tuition thrown out.
Well, there's your 4.
Well, I don't know that any of those was. I don't know that any of those was the 4 before.
But my point is this: let's have the debate.
Would you veto if they sent you a bill getting rid of in-state? Would you veto?
I don't take the bait of will I veto something.
Well,
before
why not?
Because I never do.
But either you're for it or you're against it, Governor.
Well.
If they sent you a bill that said that they wanted to get rid of it, would you veto it?
In this conversation, you asked me to talk about the issue of in-state tuition and whether or not, I think I made it very clear. We made a correct economic decision for this state that clearly, here's the issue. You want to have a conversation with the Texas legislature? How about memorializing and demanding Congress spend the money to defend the Texas border? Protect the Texas border if that is your issue. You have people here that are illegal. It's because the federal government has been absolute, abject failure at defending this border. Then we have to deal with it. We have to deal with all of the aftermath of that. So I'll be more than happy to have a discussion with members of the legislature. My bet is that bill will never get to my desk for me to have to make a decision on.
So it's a moot point.
I would suggest it is.
Governor, very quickly before we open it up for questions, a couple of questions for you about 2012, 2014, and 2016. During the presidential campaign, when you were in South Carolina, you said about Governor Romney and Boehne, quote, "I will suggest they're just vultures. They're vultures that are sitting out there on the tree limb waiting for a company to get sick, and then they swoop in, they eat the carcass, they leave with that, and they leave the skeleton. That's pretty much the critique of Governor Romney that the Democrats have embraced in painting him as out of touch during this general election campaign. Were you right then, or was that something that you wish you had back?
My instinct is the Democrats will have the same luck with it I did.
Is that it? Yeah. Do you wish you hadn't said it? Did you not believe it at the time, or do you?
Look, we all say things during the heat of campaigns that may be a little bit razor sharp, and you know, there were things said about me. I mean, and look, those days are over, and the bottom line is it didn't work.
Yeah.
It was a failed attempt.
So the critique is made irrelevant by the fact that it was unsuccessful.
I generally keep score that way.
You do? All right. Well, let me ask you about the race then as we look at it to November. Do you think that you would be running a different race than Governor Romney if you were the nominee?
Well, I think any of the candidates would probably run a different campaign because they were all different personalities. My instinct is Ron Paul would probably be running a different campaign.
Well, but I'm
so
wondering.
Look, everyone would, the idea of interchanging candidates here and having a different campaign, absolutely. I mean, everyone would run a different campaign. But I think going back and trying to say, you know, critique what's going on. The reality is we've got Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. And from my perspective, this is still not a hard decision. And it shouldn't be a hard decision for most Americans who care about where this country is going to go economically or where this country finds itself from an international standpoint and its reputation around the world. We are a country and a nation in crisis. Economically, and I will suggest to you internationally. What is going on in the Middle East is a symptom of a disease that has been going on, I think, for 3 years from the standpoint of a corrosive effort to remove America's influence in places in the world that America's influence needs to be more involved with, not less.
What I hear, Governor, is a negative case against the president, which you've made for most of the last 3.5 years. Do you have an affirmative case to make for Governor Romney?
Well, absolutely. I mean, when you look at tax policy, and I mean, I think Governor Romney, without a doubt, would be inclined to have the conversation with the states about block granting Medicaid. I mean, Mitt Romney is going to have a tax policy in place. He's going to do away with Obamacare. I mean, these two individuals are truly at opposite poles from an economic standpoint and from an international security standpoint. I mean, this is not close. I understand that it's a close election, but
you know who you're for.
Well, yeah, and I don't understand, and I think most Americans know who they're for, and we're just kind of split right down the middle right now.
Governor, it's often said that the outcome of this election in November will impact your decision whether to run in 2014. It's been suggested that if President Obama is reelected, you are apt to run for governor again, but if Governor Romney is elected, you are apt not to run. Would you give us a little insight into what your thinking is on 2014?
Sir. I will tell you that in June, I will invite you over to the Capitol, and I will share with you.
And you'll tell us. But you're not going to say until then, except to say that you're entertaining the possibility of running.
I am healthy, I am happy, I am passionate about what I do, and in June I will give you a definitive answer about my intention for 2014.
The people who say that the only reason the governor won't tell us his plans is because it's important for him to be relevant during the session,
yes,
not
sir.
Giving you enough credit. Huh?
My instinct is the governor of the state of Texas is going to be relevant.
Regardless of what his plans are.
Regardless.
Right. You know, Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst has not been so. Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst has not been so circumspect. He has said he's running again. Mm-hmm. You endorsed him against Ted Cruz. Would you like to endorse Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst for re-election tonight?
That's an interesting idea.
Here it is. Would you like to endorse Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst for re-election?
It's a little bit early to be endorsing. Let's get the legislative session over with, and then look. David has been a very strong, very loyal partner. Mm-hmm. We couldn't have had the successes in this state that we had without David Dewhurst as a very focused, dedicated lieutenant governor. And
but we'll see what happens with regard to re-election.
Well, listen, it's a long time until filing deadline, and he says he's running again. He has been a great lieutenant governor. I've campaigned for him for the United States Senate, and I think he would have made a great United States Senator. The people of the state of Texas decided Ted Cruz, and Ted's going to be a great.
And you're okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely. We had two good options, and the fact is, David has been a great lieutenant governor. I full well expect that he will have a successful session, and then he and I will both make definitive decisions on whether or not we're going to run again in June.
Last question before we go to the audience, Governor. You are apparently considering running for president again in 2016. What about that experience or the reaction to it gives you a reason to think that what happens next time would be a better experience than what happened this last time?
Well, I learned two pretty valuable lessons. Number one, I would not say in any circumstance that it wasn't an incredibly enjoyable experience. It was leading the Republican nomination for those 3 hours was an incredible experience.
Was that right? Best 3 hours of your life, huh? You like that? Well, you'll always have the memories, right, Governor?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But you are thinking about running again.
Listen, I would not take it off the table, but that is not on my radar screen at the moment. Having a good legislative session, working with the members of the legislature, continuing to move public education forward, higher education forward, looking at transportation infrastructure, water and power in the state. I mean, we are watched from around the world. There are going to be people coming in here in November for the Formula One race into Austin, Texas. South by Southwest brings an international audience into the state. Texas is so on the radar screen of I was in Italy talking to Ambrosetti Group and the corporate leaders from across the European community and America that were there. Texas is on their radar screen, and most of them right in the middle of it. They know that there is something special going on in the state. And for us to continue to stay focused on the places that we need to improve, that we need to continue to be focused on is what I'm passionate about.
That's what you're thinking about.
I mean, I get up every day excited about the opportunity to go sell Texas somewhere, whether it was in North Dallas last night or whether it was in Milan, Italy a week ago. I mean, this state has so much to sell. When the governor of Florida and the governor of Wisconsin are sitting in Dallas, Texas, talking about we want our states to be more like Texas, that is a powerful message across this country. So that's my focus. 2014 and 2016 will take care of themselves, but we got to get back in here in January, Senator, do our work, continue to keep this state as the most competitive, as the most powerful economic engine in America.